Hello, so I'm going over the small, how many pages? 68 pages, including references, or not including references. It's 52-page book, God and Being by Nathan Lyons. Basically, his question is, how are we supposed to see God in light of this notion of being? And he says there's two kind of sub-traditions in Western thought. There's the beyond being tradition and the being itself tradition. And then he looks in a third part at reconciling them. And yeah, a little pet peeve is that he talks of the Abrahamic beliefs and includes Jews, Muslims, and Christians in that. And I wouldn't do that. But yeah, at least he doesn't say Judeo-Christian or something like ridiculous like that. That's even more ridiculous. But as a Eastern Orthodox Christian, I think that I was at first skeptical of the being itself tradition. I was thinking being itself is an energy, and if we're looking at what God really is, or the essence, then that is going to be beyond being. So I was pretty skeptical of anything other than the beyond being tradition. But after reading this, I've definitely warmed to the being itself tradition, as Lyons calls it. I think one thing that you're really going to get from this tiny book is that, or is his scholarship really. He's familiar, it seems, with analytic philosophy, but he is part of University of Notre Dame, Australia. And it's noticeable because he cites his sources. He's pretty good at paying attention to language in the sources. I don't think it'll be giving it too much away if I kind of mention how he lays out the question, which is, if being is like a box which contains everything there is, then where do we place God? It seems that we shouldn't consider him to be one being among other beings, and that's in fact not what the being itself tradition thinkers do. But at the same time, if he's outside of being, that would seem to be straightforwardly to say that he doesn't exist, and how can something that doesn't exist cause the box of being and the things in it? So at the time of this part of the recording, I haven't read 7 pages of it, but and I'll say in the video when I've read the whole thing. I guess what I could say is that I can agree with seeing God as being itself, as long as at least two things are also affirmed as like a qualification of that. One, that he is at the same time more than being, and so also if he exists then we don't exist. If we exist then he doesn't exist. It's at two different ontological planes, so to speak. And he does quote, I think you can find that in Maximus, but I think he quotes that from Gregory Palamas. This, if we exist, then he doesn't exist. If he exists, then we don't. Or another way that I've found congenial of saying that is that he alone exists, or he alone truly exists. But once we start talking about God having a unique kind of existence, I become a little more uneasy with this, characterizing God as just necessary being or pure being, and therefore pure act, pure mind. These things, I'd be okay with saying that they're energies. Um, yeah, when it starts getting into the Thomistic stuff, where we're talking about how God's whatness just is his thatness, and there's this kind of simplicity there, I become even less sure whether I can get behind that. I think that is the one thing that Nathan Lyons hasn't looked at enough, or so far anyway. I haven't read those 7 pages, but he hasn't addressed the Eastern Orthodox distinction between energies or divine names on the one hand and the divine essence on the other. But he has addressed Dionysius and has mentioned how Dionysius takes the good or being to be 2 names. Or he doesn't mention names like that, but no, my bad, actually he does. So he quotes Dionysius: "The sacred writers have preeminently set apart good for the superdivine God from all other names," end quote. And then he also mentions the divine name of being that Dionysius gives. And so it seems to me that the BB tradition, or beyond being tradition he speaks of, is able to incorporate the other more easily than vice versa, because we can talk about the being itself, affirmation, or predication of God, but as an energy. Whereas it's sometimes with these thinkers, I don't see enough of the apophatic in them. I don't see any of the ineffable that I expect, to speak truly of God. And so some thinkers that seem to run afoul and reduce being to a god, reduce God to a being too much in their language would be, first of all, among some examples I can pull out here, Anselm. What do you know? And old Anselm. Although he does say God is before and beyond all things, he also says of all things possesses existence to the highest degree. Now that I just would not get on board with. I can't get on board with that statement that God possesses existence to the highest degree. Then there's this quote of Hildegard of Bingen, who comes close to saying something again that we can get behind. That God alone exists, okay, in and of himself. Nor does he receive his being from anything else. Now that again, I think falls prey to, the critique of ontotheology. I can go for that radical claim, God alone exists. But once you qualify it in and of himself, then we're just talking about a being that exists in and of himself and is unique in that way. That doesn't necessarily describe God in my mind. That could just be like a brute fact or something alongside everything else that exists. It doesn't necessarily generate or create everything else that exists, but is just there in and of itself. Anyway, sorry, Hildegard of Bingen, if I'm misconstruing you. But later we have a quote from Catherine of Siena that I could get on board with. Know that no one can escape my hands. Oh, she's quoting like God, or like she's speaking as if she's quoting God. Know that no one can escape my hands, for I am who I am. Exodus 3:14. Whereas you have no being at all. Okay, there we go. Then further in the Islamic Arabic tradition, he quotes Al-Farabi, who construes God as a highest existence and the cause of existence, which enjoys the most elevated rank of perfect existence. So that again, I think you're putting God in the box when you put him in this spectrum. And then he quotes, and is different in substance from everything else, but still, even if it's unique, it could just be part of the spectrum. Just the only member in this class that's like the highest rank or something. And then finally, he mentions Gersonides, who says such terms as exists, one, essence, are said of God by priority, and of others beside him by posteriority. Okay, it's okay. This is so because his existence, oneness, and essence belong to him by virtue of himself. I think what it is in these thinkers that I can't get behind, I think the problem is that he's either part of a spectrum of being, which of course he can be. He's omnipresent. He, in my opinion, incarnates, and so he is in some sense part of the spectrum, or in his pre-incarnate manifestations, Christophanies. But the other problem that I have is thinking of God as having being. And I think of God as generating being. So there's no need to have being if you're more than being and generating it. Again, to quote this Gersonides, God's priority is so because his existence, oneness, and essence belong to him by virtue of himself. And maybe to get at my intuition more, it's that God doesn't have to be in the box. So he doesn't have to have being. And this is also to say that he doesn't have to be part of the spectrum or hierarchy. Now, none of these thinkers that I just quoted say, well, he necessarily has being. So they don't say that. It's just that I want to see that qualification that he doesn't have to be in the box, but he can be. So, and when these being itself tradition thinkers are qualifying being in other ways, I'm kind of shrugging like, okay, sure, necessary, pure being, absolute, indefinite, infinite. That all sounds great, but I'm just looking for some kind of apophatic qualification that's going to say that he's more than all of that. He's more than what we can name and think. And I was actually surprised to see that some notion of analogy can get you that. So we say, so for example, we could say we predicate being of God, but only analogously. It says something, but God is more than being, so he contains being preeminently. Okay, but he's more than being, so there's something that our predication doesn't capture. I think that's fine. True analogical statements is, I think, that's fine, that's acceptable. Another good point he makes, kind of against my leaning, my beyond being tradition leaning, is that the being itself tradition accommodates the intellect of God better, since there is the mind of God and then all of the divine ideas. There is this kind of well, I would say plurality, and essence energies helps accommodate that. Um, but if we're saying that God is beyond being and beyond thought, um, how are we going to conceive of God as having a mind, as having personal characteristics? He says, like um, agency, will, love, creativity. I think to me that just shows how, yes, we need the cataphatic statements as well. In fact, all of our revealed tradition, um, revelation itself, like the revelation of the Trinity, is uh, a set of cataphatic statements. God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's just that we can get on board with that doctrine of analogy, that he is a person, but not like one you ever meet in your sensory experience, or even mental experience, if that's possible. If maybe you've met a demon, let's say, and um, it never took shape, and so you never sensed it with anything but your noetic sense, let's say. God is not a person like any of those. Um, he's kind of super person or super eminent person. So yeah, you can say is true person, and no other being is one in comparison. And yet we are persons too by partaking of the image, by being part of or in the image. I think it's also an important statement that the reason that you have to say you can't be a pure beyond being thinker. The reason you have to say that God is a being is because he is a cause of everything in the box, everything in being. Um, yeah, so as a cause or a source, that seems to involve him. Okay, so I read the rest of the book. It's good. Um, he kind of sets up a problem with the beyond being tradition by quoting Proclus, and in that quote, Proclus says, we ought not say that the good exists, since it is beyond existing. And yeah, so while you can err in the being itself tradition by going too far and being like a theistic personalist, and you can see God as just this super being, a being, but it's like just top dog. You can also err in this Neoplatonist tradition. Like I wouldn't say that I wouldn't agree with Proclus here that you can't say that the good exists. And yeah, and then he quotes David Bentley Hart. I thought it was a good quote, despite my differences with DBH on certain things. That I agree with him here. The being itself, beyond being, are like two different moments in the analogy, in the what he wants to call the analogy of being. I think that's true. So, um, and yeah, surprisingly found myself in agreement with something Augustine said, which was like roughly it was that, you know, God truly exists, and so we don't. We're kind of like pale shadows, or I don't know what he calls it. He says that yeah, he contrasts God's perfect existence with creatures' non-existence. A created thing slips away, flows off, and holds on to nothing actual. That is, to speak Latin, it does not exist. Yeah, these things. It sounds extreme, but I'm totally on board with that. Yenaras also comes out across here as a little bit too extreme, saying that there's an insurmountable gulf between these traditions. Although one has to wonder whether Jan Ross was really talking about this in particular. But like usual, Nathan Lyons has his quote, so you can check it. And my last comment would be, yeah, he thinks he can solve it relying on Aquinas and making this distinction between a thing whose essence is just to be infinite, to be, and everything else that partakes in to be, finite beings that partake of infinite esse or to be. Um, I I don't see how this helps. Like, okay, I can see how maybe this infinite this infinite to be is not something that we can think about, but still, it's something that we can name, and it is a concept. And that's the problem I see with that kind of solution, is that this is still not getting it, because God is beyond what is nameable or thinkable. So yeah, so I agree with him that you can reconcile these traditions, that I guess you can say they were always part of the same tradition, and only us modern folks uh, who have been alienated from the tradition are coming back to it and seeing divisions in it that aren't really there. Um, yeah, so again, pretty good. And thanks, shout out, thanks to Darren for letting me know about this book.